this is Pastor Joel with Right Response Ministries, and this is another episode of our show called Questions. Real quick, I want to plug the shirt that I'm wearing. I'm going to stand up so you can see it. It says Reformed Man. There's a couple individuals who have recently started a company called Reformed Man Co. Go and check them out online. You can check out their website. They do a lot of different clothing for men, and they also, I think, are getting started with a barbershop. And so I would encourage you to check that out. I'm not exactly sure what area they're in, but you can find it all online. Check out their website, Reformed Man Co. Check out their website, and I promised them that I would make a quick plug for them because they are gospel believing, they are Reformed, they are Christian, and they are taking a stand against civil tyranny and woke ideology and critical race theory and all those kinds of things. And so there's not many of us, and so we need to stick together. So shout out to the Reformed Man Co. All right. That being said, let's go ahead and start with our episode today. The question is this: should Christians get the vaccine? I'm not even going to say COVID, right? The vaccine. We all know what we're talking about. The vaccine of all vaccines. Should Christians get the vaccine? All right, breaking it down a little bit more. There is a lot of pressure currently for everyone to get vaccinated. Some states are even talking about vaccine passports. So the question, fleshing it out a little bit more, it says, what should Christians think about this? Should we get the vaccine? With vaccine passports coming down the line, maybe for some states, California, who knows, New York, with these things all in question, with there being this constant, massive push for every single person in the United States of America and really the world. Lots of other nations are doing it too, and other nations have taken a stronger stance, like France. But with all that coming down the pipeline and America looking like certain states in our nation may follow suit, how should Christians be thinking about this? What should Christians do? So let me answer the question by saying this. In this debate, there are two sides, all right? I want you to kind of visualize with me. If you're watching, then you can see my hands. If you're listening, that's fine. It's not that hard to see. It's just two hands sticking up in the air. But I want you to visualize this, right? There's two sides to this equation, and there's this middle ground. I'll talk about that in a second. But in this issue, there are two sides, all right? One side is, I don't want to get the vaccine. Okay, that's one side. The other side is, now this is what you would think. You would think, I don't want to get the vaccine. And the other side is, I do want to get the vaccine. Nope. Those aren't the two sides. It's, I don't want to get the vaccine. And the other side is, you will get the vaccine. Now notice the key difference there. One side is about what I don't want to do. The other side of the aisle is what you must do. So you have one position that says, I don't personally want to get this vaccine. And you would think that the counter to that position would be, I personally do want to get the vaccine. But that's not the issue that we have going on. That's not the issue. The problem is not that half of the country doesn't want to get a vaccine and half of the country does. If that was the issue, there would be no issue. No, the problem is that there are a few million people in the nation currently that do not want to get the vaccine, legal adults. And then there are a ton, millions and millions of people in the United States that are not content to have the vaccine themselves, but want to ensure and even enforce that everyone else gets the vaccine as well, which brings into question, does the vaccine actually work? Now, I think it does. I think that the vaccine is highly effective. That said, though, if you actually think it works, then you should be content with just getting it yourself. That's the way a vaccine works. The way that a vaccine works is I get it so that I'm safe. So it doesn't matter what you do. Right? It's a decision that I make for me. I'm going to get the vaccine for my protection. And so now it really doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. And so even this push for everyone to get vaccinated kind of flies in the face of the effectiveness of this vaccine. We keep wondering, people are saying, well, how come everyone's not getting the vaccine? How come there are these obstinate people, these right-wing, conservative nut jobs, Trump followers that don't want to get, no, that's not what's going on. First and foremost, a lot of people who aren't getting the vaccine, to be completely frank, are part of the black community, the brown community. They're minorities that don't want to get the vaccine, who vote Democrat, by the way. in most elections, but don't want to get the vaccine because they don't feel good about it. And there's a lot of other people, yes, most of them happen to be conservatives, but the reason why they don't want to get the vaccine is because the science, right? The science, not actual science, but this new religion called science, the science, is constantly changing. Dr. Fauci is a joke. He's told us one thing, then he tells us another, then another, then another. And so, yeah, there's a lot of hesitancy to get the vaccine. You also have a vaccine that's not FDA approved and that right now has a legal immunity for the next 4 years if there's any severe reactions to the vaccine, right? These companies, and you need to know that, they have legal immunity right now. That was part of the deal, that they would go ahead and roll out a vaccine super, super quick that is not yet FDA approved, and that they would have legal immunity if anything really bad happened. Now, in terms of sample size, right? Like what is the statistics of severe reactions to the vaccine? Well, we have a massive sample size. We have like 160 million something adults in the nation have been vaccinated, at least gotten one of the 2 shots. And that's Pfizer, Moderna, and then Johnson & Johnson is kind of a one and done shot. So the point is, most people have been vaccinated, most adults at this point, or at least half. That's a massive sample size. But what we don't have is longevity. So we have a lot of people in this experiment of what's the side effects to the vaccine. Well, we have millions of people who have the vaccine that we can observe, but what we don't have is we don't have millions of people who have the vaccine and who have had it for years. We don't know what the long-term side effects are because no one has had this vaccine for more than a few months because it's only existed. It's only been available for a few months. Now, COVID-19, whether it be the Delta variant, and they're already talking about new variants, look, this is something we're going to have to live with, right? Just like we live with the flu. And I know that, well, you can't compare COVID to the flu. Yes, you can. You can. The flu has multiple different strains, right? So you think of getting a flu shot. Maybe you've heard, people say in the past, this year's flu shot is no good. Have you ever heard someone say that? This year's flu? That's because what they do, my wife is an RN, and so I'm familiar with this. What they do with the flu shot is they pick, a few of the most popular strains of what the flu, they're guessing of what the flu is going to be that year. What strain of the flu is going to be most widespread? And there's always a few strains that are going to be most widespread in society that particular flu season. And if they guess right, and it's an educated guess, right? It's not like they're pulling out of a hat. They're monitoring things and observing things. It's an educated guess, but sometimes they get it wrong, meaning that the particular flu shot that year, that season, misses the strain that's getting, the masses sick. And so people get sick, people get the flu. COVID's going to do the same thing. Give it a few years. Give it a couple decades, there's going to be multiple different strains. And on average, yes, there are exceptions, but on average, what's going to happen is it as the virus mutates and there are other variants of the virus, they're going to become, in some cases, more spreadable, more contagious, but less potent. And that's what we're seeing with the Delta variant right now. We're seeing, cases are up, cases are up, cases are up. Well, one thing that we need to do when we watch the news is, first, we got to remember neutrality is a myth. Everybody has an agenda. The news is just the left-wing media, the media left-wing department of our left-wing government. And so cases are up, cases are up. Well, there's an agenda there. And one of the questions we need to ask is, what's your agenda? What's your motive? But we also need to ask, when data is being presented, we need to ask the question, why? Why cases? Right? Because the big deal in the beginning of this whole thing was deaths. And what we see now is that cases are up, but deaths are down. And so part of that is because even though the vaccine is not proving to be super effective in keeping people from getting the Delta variant, people who are vaccinated are still getting COVID, and yet their symptoms are far less severe. For most people who have been vaccinated at least one shot of the vaccine, Moderna or Pfizer, if they get the Delta variant, there's still a fairly good likelihood they're going to get the Delta variant. And if they get it, though, it's a case of the sniffles. It's very, very mild. However, there's a bunch of other people who have natural immunity because they have the antibodies because they actually got COVID the first go around. That's my whole family, me, my wife, my kids. And so if we get the Delta variant, it's the same kind of thing. It's probably going to be much more mild. So we're either not going to get it at all because the antibodies are going to fight it off. We're going to have immunity, or we are going to get it, but the symptoms are going to be more mild. So the Delta variant is highly transmissible. It's very contagious, but it's not quite as potent. And one of the reasons it's not as potent is because a lot of people have the antibodies from the first go around of COVID or from the vaccine. So all that being said, this is something that we're going to have to live with. And we cannot continue to put the entire world on pause, right? 15 days to slow the spread. Remember that joke? That was a good one, huh? That's a knee slapper right there. 15 days to slow the spread. How's that going, right? Year and a half later. Yeah, we're not doing this anymore. We're not doing this anymore. Christians, you need to stop doing this. Stop giving in to fear every single second that something comes out on the news. We cannot bow the knee to Caesar anymore. We should not be putting masks on our children and sending them to school. There's no science behind that, right? They put out this huge study, and one of the things that was said in a study that was done about schools, right? There were schools that had a mask mandate, and with these schools that had a mask mandate, they said all these different data points and all these different arguments and why kids should mask in school and all this kind of stuff. And then at the end of the document, one of the sentences, it was so funny, was it said that there were no comps, meaning there were no comparisons. This is the data of how many people, how many cases, and all that kind of stuff in a school that had a mask mandate, but they didn't have data on a school that did not have a mask mandate in order to compare the two. So it means nothing. That means nothing. It's nothing. Because we don't know by comparison. Now, what we do know is that kids are not very susceptible when it comes to the symptoms of the virus. And so to be afraid about our kids and all these kind of things in the first place is kind of funny. And it's like, well, but kids, maybe they can be spreaders. Well, there's not a lot of evidence for that either. There's not a lot of evidence that kids, get severe symptoms from the virus. And there's not even a lot of evidence that kids really spread the virus. And even if they did, that's the whole thing about a vaccine. You have the vaccine. Stop telling everybody else in the entire world what to do. You got the vaccine to protect yourself. If you got it, you're protected. Right? Isn't that the point of the vaccine? See, you kind of have to pick a lane here. You either have to say everyone should get the vaccine because it's effective, right? Because that's what you're saying. You're saying this vaccine is so good, it's so effective, it's so important that everyone should get it. But then on the other hand, if the vaccine is so effective, then you getting the vaccine should be sufficient. That's enough. So anyways, back to the drawing board here, these two positions. I don't want to get the vaccine, and the other position being you should get the vaccine. And in the middle, it's just a bunch of people saying, I don't really know. So what should Christians do? All right, there's a lot of things here. Here's the ethical thing. All right, so with Moderna and Pfizer, they both use the fetal line in the testing of their vaccine, but not in the making. In the testing, but not in the making. Okay, and so that means that the fetal line of children who were murdered in their mother's wombs back from, I believe, the 1960s or 70s. 2 kids in China, and there's a third one. But they've been cloning these fetal cells of aborted children who were murdered and using them in testing or even in the creation, the making of certain vaccines. Moderna and Pfizer, which are the two most popular, they use the fetal line in the testing, but not in the making. Johnson & Johnson use the fetal line both in the testing and in the making. And so I would not be a big fan of Johnson & Johnson for ethical reasons because they're actually using the fetal line, fetal cells from murdered children in the making of that vaccine. However, that said, from what we can tell with Johnson & Johnson, it's more of a traditional vaccination in the way that you give someone a little bit of a virus and they build up a natural immunity, whereas Pfizer and Moderna are a little scary because it's actually, it's not a traditional vaccine. It's actually changing your proteins and these kind of, and we don't know, again, we don't know the long-term effects. It's like, well, millions of people have had it and there's not a whole lot of severe side effects. Well, there have been some severe side effects, people having heart problems, people dying. There have been some severe side effects, and particularly with women when it comes to their menstrual cycle. And that's, I think, very concerning. We don't know. Is the vaccine vaccine we're going to find out 5 years from now? Because that's the thing. We have a massive sample of millions and millions of people who have it, but all of them have only had it for a few weeks or a few months. That's it. So we don't know what the long-term effects are. 5 years from now, are we going to find out that a large percentage of the women who got the vaccine, either the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine, are sterile? I don't know. That's the thing. We don't know. Now, I'm not trying to scare you and say, oh my goodness, I'm not an anti-vax person. I'm not. I'm an ethical person, so I want to look into vaccines that I'm getting for my children, those kinds of things. I want to make those decisions carefully. I want to make them biblically. But I'm not just an anti-vax person. But here's the thing. Individual freedom and individual prudence. Each individual, and especially individual men, need to make decisions for themselves and their families. And so one of the things that you need to do is you just need to calculate risk. What's the risk of the virus? And what's the risk of the vaccine? The vaccine is an unknown risk. The virus at this point is a known risk. The virus has been around long enough to where we know what the death count is. We know the severe side effects and symptoms of, not side effects, but the severe symptoms of the virus. And we know what percentage the virus kills people based off of their demographic, right? So if you're 30, you need to look at 30-year-olds with the virus, how many of them were hospitalized and how many of them ultimately died, and weigh that against the unknown risk of the vaccine. Now, if you're 75, right, it's just different. If you're 75 years old and you already have, lung problems and respiratory issues and these kinds of things, then yeah, okay, the unknown risk of long-term side effects that could come from the vaccine, that's probably not your biggest concern. Your biggest concern is COVID. That's the more urgent concern. And so then you need to look at getting a vaccine. And if you're a Christian, you need to try to do it biblically. Look for a vaccine with companies that have not used the fetal cell line in the making of the vaccine for sure. And ideally, you want to find a company that has a vaccine that didn't use the fetal cell line, even in the testing of the vaccine. So if you're 75 or you're 65 or you're 55 even, you want to look at, you're weighing risk. That's all it is. Do you have, are you older? Do you have respiratory problems? Do you have these medical conditions already? Do you have autoimmune, disorder? Do you, all those kind of things? You're just taking that into consideration. My concern, my frustration is that you have a bunch of 20 and 30-year-olds feeling pressured to go and get a vaccine, perfectly healthy 20 and 30-year-olds feeling pressured to go and get a vaccine who have some of them already had COVID. People are pressuring me even, to get the vaccine. That's insane. That is absolutely insane. I've had COVID. I know I had COVID. And not just because I tested positive, but because I tested positive and my wife and my kids and everybody else in our family who also got it with us. And we all had symptoms. It lasted about a week and now we're fine. And that's not to belittle or make light or minimize the virus. Yeah, people have died and it's tragic. It's absolutely tragic. But we can't stop the whole world because a few people have died. Well, Joel, it's 600,000. Well, 600,000 people. What? I don't think so. I really don't think so. Right? When somebody falls off of their motorcycle and gets in an accident and with their last dying breath blows their nose and the medics on site say it was a COVID death, I don't buy that. So I don't think it was 600,000. I think a lot of people died. I think it was a very, very bad flu. Probably, if I had to guess, probably 3, 4, 5 times worse than a bad flu year. At least 2, 3 times worse than a bad flu year. And I think each year there's probably going to be different variants of COVID, like the Delta variant. And it's probably not going to be as potent, probably going to be less severe symptoms. And very quickly, it's going to be kind of like the flu. And there'll be shots each year that you can get. And there should be also, like the flu, the option of not getting a shot. Since when have you had to get a flu shot to leave the state? Since when have you had to get a flu shot to just to go into a hospital? Or take a flu test and test negative within, 72 hours prior. This is insanity. This is absolute insanity. It's panic. It's just panic. And the reason why our government and our media that, I don't know, the last time somebody did real journalism, I don't know. I don't even know if that's happened in my lifetime, but our government and its counterpart, the media, that I don't know if they get paid directly from Joe Biden or what, but they're two peas in a pod and they're all about panic. And the reason why is because here's what you got to do, right? If you want to accrue power, you've got to get rid of people's personal liberty, right? So your quest for power, your goal of gaining power, individual liberty of the masses stands in the way. So how can you get the masses to trade in their personal liberty so that you can accrue more power? Right? Because that's a lousy trade. Who's going to make that trade? Nobody's going to do that. Nobody's going to say, hey, okay, I would love to give away some more of my personal liberties so that you could have more power, government. Nobody's going to say that. So how do you get people to do that? Fear. Right? So instead of the trade being, you give me your personal liberty so that I can have more power, this is what you do. You say, hey, I need a little bit of your personal liberty so that I can ensure for you public safety. That's always been for a year and a half and a lot longer than that. I mean, this is tale as old as time, but especially with COVID for the last year and a half, that's the trade, right? The government promises public safety. Right? I mean, that's something that Joe Biden literally said. He said, I'm not going to shut down the economy. I'm not going to shut down homes and business. I'm going to shut down the virus. No, you're not. You're not God. No, man. What do you mean you're going to shut down the virus? You don't control the weather. You don't control disease and pestilence. You're not God. People are not God. Joe Biden is not God. The state is not God. The church is not God. I'm not God. Pastors aren't God. You're not God. We don't get to shut down the virus. It's here. We're going to live with it. And we pray that things get better, and they are. They are getting better. Florida already, the cases are coming back down. And so at the end of the day, we're going to have to live with the virus. We can't shut down the virus. None of us are God. And yet that's what happens, though. That's what the state has been doing again and again, is promising, we will give you public safety if you'll just give us personal freedom, individual liberty. And the farce, multiple degrees of ridiculousness, but the first degree would be this: we'll give you public safety, we'll provide public safety if you give us personal freedom. The first problem with that is the assumption that the state has the power to provide public safety, because it assumes that they have power that they don't have. None of us get to shut down the virus. None of us are God. Mask mandates, there's really no evidence that mask mandates have made anything better. Now, I'm not talking about the efficacy of masks. I'm talking about the efficacy of mask mandates. I don't think we should do mask mandates. Certainly shouldn't do them in school with kids, with 7-year-olds and 9-year-olds. That's ridiculous. But even with adults, mask mandates, there is no solid evidence to say that it has slowed the spread in any way. Now, do masks, right? Mask mandates and masks being different. The science behind masks, well, it looks like it slowed the spread maybe a little bit in some cases, but even masks, what are people wearing? People are taking just a random dirty cloth out of their pocket and strapping it across their face. Like, people aren't walking around wearing N95s, and even if they did, nurses and doctors, when they're wearing an N95 in a surgical room or something like that, with each patient, they're changing their mask. It's a new mask. Even the people who have N95s are wearing the same mask for a month, sticking it in their pocket, dropping it on the floor of their car, with old French fries, and then picking it up and trying to put it on their face. And they're moving it around throughout the day and scratching and pulling it down every time they have to talk. Have you ever seen that? How hilarious is that? Somebody's right in front of you. You're ordering like at a coffee, at a coffee shop, and the person who's serving you, you're like, I can't hear you, and they pull down their mask to talk. And I don't blame them. I'm just saying it's a joke. It's a joke. That's how everybody is. So my point is, mask mandates, forcing people to do this, forcing them to do that, trying to shut people down, put them in their homes, close certain businesses, all these things, it's enough. And if you're still buying into all this at this point, then I got a bridge I'd like to sell you. If you're a year and a half later, if you're still buying into this, you're dumb. You really need to repent of being dumb. You really do. The Proverbs speak of the simple person, the simple man. He's dumb. He's foolish. He's a fool. And it is a sin. Foolishness is a sin. Simple-mindedness is a sin. It's a sin. So snap out of that. Repent of being dumb. You really need to. And you need to resist tyranny. That's the big issue right now. The big issue is not, it's not the virus. The big issue is civil tyranny. The big issue is economic disaster. The big issue is churches and their ecclesiastical freedom and the freedom of fathers to work and provide for the family. That's been the issue from day one. Those are the issues. And for us to pause everything for a couple weeks because we didn't know, that makes sense, right? The old expression, fool me once, shame on you. But fool me for a year and a half, shame on me. It's your fault. So vaccines, again, all I would say is just be prudent. Be prudent. We don't know what the side effects are. We really don't. We know that there are some severe side effects for the vaccine. Some people have died. One more thing I'll say about that is, again, neutrality is a myth, right? Everybody has an agenda. So when it comes even to data, certain things can be emphasized and other things can be hidden, right? So science doesn't lie, true science. But the problem is we're not talking about science, unadulterated science. We're talking about people presenting science. And people have an allegiance. People are not neutral. And so you have the scientists who they have a dog in the fight. They have an allegiance. You have the big farm companies. They certainly have an agenda. And then you have the media that has an agenda, and you have the state that has an agenda. Everybody's got an agenda. So it's not just raw neutral data. It's data being presented by finite and fallen men. And so certain things can be emphasized and certain things can be subtracted or neglected. All right. So like, this many cases, but not really reporting nearly as much on deaths. So that being said, when it comes to the vaccine and in terms of side effects, we're hearing, if we just, again, do this, how many deaths with COVID? All right. There's a tally that's constantly ticking to where we know the exact amount of people who have died by COVID. But like I said earlier, that includes people who have died from gunshots. That includes people who have died in motorcycle accidents. It's a bloated number, is my point. That number is significantly higher than the number of people who've actually died from COVID. Over here, what's the number of people who have had severe reactions to the vaccine or died from the vaccine? Well, this number is real low. But my point is, anything that's close to a COVID death gets counted, right? Whereas it's got to be blatant and abundantly clear that this is a severe side effect of the vaccine for this to be counted, right? This number has a lot more scrutiny than this number. This number is like that person sneezed and then fell off a cliff, COVID death. Boom, chalk it up to a COVID death. Over here, there's a lot more scrutiny. So this is a lot lower. This number of COVID deaths is a lot higher. And so my point is we just need to be aware of these kind of things. You can't just go and look at numbers and tallies and say, oh, well, numbers don't lie. Yeah, numbers don't lie. But lying people who present numbers inaccurately do lie. Neutrality is a myth. So the vaccine, exercise prudence, and also exercise biblical ethics. Don't get a vaccine that tells our nation and tells big pharma and tells our government that it's okay to murder children in their mother's womb. Don't incentivize abortion. Don't do that. So if you're going to get a vaccine, get an ethical vaccine. But also, at the same time, exercise prudence. If you're 20-something years old and you don't have any kind of pre-existing medical condition, you have no business getting a vaccine. You just don't. And if somebody in your family, a family member or a friend is pushing you to get a vaccine and they already have a vaccine, then just say, I'm sorry, but you already have a vaccine. If you're so convinced that it works, Convinced enough that you're trying to push me to get vaccine. Well, that's counter logic, right? This is so effective, so you should get it. Well, if it's so effective and you already got it, then I think we're done here. I think we're good. So all that being said, I hope that that's helpful. I know that I'm rambling a little bit, but I hope that that's helpful for you. If you're going to get a vaccine, make sure it's ethical. And if you're going to get a vaccine, make sure that the decision you're making is prudent and that it's not out of the fear of man, that you're not just bowing the knee, right? My wife, she currently works one night a week, very, very, very part-time as a nurse, one night a week. The rest of the time she is at home as a mom and a wife. And her company right now wants her to get the vaccine. They're doing vaccine mandates. And she's not going to be getting it because she's 29 years old and healthy and already had COVID. So no. She asked me what I thought. I said, no, sweetheart, you're not going to get the vaccine. Why? Because it's stupid. That's stupid. You already had COVID. You're 29 and you're healthy. So why are you going to go get a shot it's not even FDA approved in your arm, and we have no idea what it's going to do later on? That's just foolish. But there's a mandate at her company, and so she's filing right now for an exemption. And the reason that I would suggest for you, if you're a Christian, to use, if you're trying to be exempt, talk about the fetal cell line. Say, I'm a part of a religion that esteems the sanctity of life. And I cannot support anything that that says it's okay to murder babies in their mother's womb and to use them, right, to end the life of a child to further the life of an adult. I can't support that because I'm a Christian. And this is what the Bible says about life. And go ahead and file an exemption. Now, the reason why I suggest that, last thing I'll say, the reason why I suggest that you should use that as your exemption, because that might be accepted. That exemption, and in some cases, it may not. But I think there are some companies that will accept that exemption on a religious basis, the sanctity of life. What I would not do to try to get an exemption is use the prudence argument and say, I'm 29 years old. I don't have any pre-existing health issues. I'm perfectly healthy, and I've already had COVID. And right now, the science says that there may actually be more durability for those who have built up the antibodies naturally by getting the virus than those who have the vaccine. Now, that's science, but that that case for an exemption will not be accepted, very likely. You know why? Because that case for an exemption is a case that comes from thought. That's not what our culture wants. It's not what our government wants. It's not what corporations want. It's not what pharmacies want. People in power don't want the public to be a thinking public. Period. They don't. Whether you're in the corporate world of power or you're in the civil world of power, whether you're part of the state or whether you're a part of Wall Street or whatever it is, what you don't want is thinking masses, because a thinking man is a free man. He's free. He thinks for himself. He exercises prudence. He makes his own choices. He's not controlled and yanked around by the neck on a leash by panic and fear. And so if you say, I'm not going to get the vaccine, I'd like an exemption. You work for a company, they're rolling out a vaccine mandate at your company. You say, well, I'd like an exemption status because I've already had COVID. I already have the antibodies. Right now, there's no evidence to suggest that the vaccine is any more successful and warding off new strains of the virus like the Delta strain than just getting immunity the old-fashioned way, by actually having the virus. Plus, I'm young, I'm 25, I'm 35, I don't have any pre-existing health conditions, I'm not spreading the virus, I'm healthy, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm sick, right? Because that's lying. Healthy people don't need to act like they're sick. If you say that, you're not going to get an exemption. Not because it's not a good reason, it's a great reason. You're not going to get an exemption because what you've done is you've just betrayed yourself, really. And what you've done is you've just put a target on your chest and said, I am a free thinking man. So not only will you not get an exemption, I wouldn't be surprised if within the next 6 months they find a reason to fire you. Companies don't want people to think. Our state doesn't want people to think. But I want you to think. I want you to think because God wants you to think. He gave you a mind. He gave you a brain. He calls you to be discerning, to exercise discernment and prudence and wisdom. Get wisdom like a garland. Wrap it around your neck. Above all other things, it's precious, like gold, like silver. Get wisdom. The Bible esteems and calls men to aspire to thinking. To thinking, to contemplation, to meditation, to wisdom, to discernment. God wants us to think. He loves when we think. But our government doesn't. Not right now. And a lot of corporations, sadly, do not. They do not want free thinking men. So if you're just trying to get out of getting the vaccine, your company has some kind of vaccine mandate coming down the pipeline, well, use the old classic sanctity of life, I'm a Christian, fetal line argument. It's a good argument and it's true. Christians need to be ethical. We do not need to support anything that uses the cells of murdered children. So it's a good argument. Hope that's helpful, and I will let you go. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, we hope that you'll take a moment and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can watch more content like this. Also, take a moment and give this video a like so that it can reach more people, and take a moment and click on the bell so that you'll be notified whenever we come out with new content. Thanks so much. God bless.